Hey everybody, I'm Katallina, and today we're here to discuss episode 2 of Bye Bye Earth. If I'm being honest, I'm having a pretty hard time deciding where I really want to put my finger on how I feel about this show so far. But what I can say for it in its favor is that it's definitely making me ask a lot of questions. And I suppose that for the point in the story that we're at, it's not necessarily a bad thing that I'm asking more questions than I'm getting answers. But because of the incredible world building that I'm seeing here, there are definitely a lot of questions to ask. And that by itself would be interesting. But we've got this unusual situation where the protagonist is every bit as confusing and confounding as the actual world is. And it's making it so that it's a lot harder to have somewhere to place footing. So let's start with talking about Belle, since she is the center of this story. Belle definitely seems like she is a character that comes with baggage that she had before we actually stepped into the story, and we get way more about that here in this episode. We find out at one point in the story that Belle has destroyed the weapon of a man. Now, that doesn't necessarily sound like it would be a big deal, but in this world it seems to be that when you break a weapon, in some extent you break the person who is using it. We actually see this done inside of the episode when she's fighting people at the bar because they're going to attack the bunny. And it's really quite a crazy concept, but it's also interesting to see how the consequences of fighting someone are not just reflected in the fighter, but also in the weapon. Given the fact that she is so obsessed with her sword, Runding, to the point that she actually sleeps with it, I guess it makes sense that there must be something very important about the weapons in this world. And I hope that as the story progresses, we realize that this aspect has something valuable to say. We also hear Belle talk about the idea that to her there is no distinction between cutting a flower or a plant or a person. And she's talking about this with someone, and he is like, I really hope that your journey will help you learn to distinguish the difference between those things. And they're both right in their own way, I suppose. Some people idealistically would make the argument that anything that gets destroyed that is a living thing is something that was worth being alive and that was worth leaving alone. Whereas a more practical approach, of course, would be to recognize that sentient creatures that actually recognize and are aware of their existence have a higher right to life than a flower or a mushroom or something would have. So there are definitely two different ways of looking at things, and I do find it both interesting and slightly disturbing to see that Belle has the point of view that she has. I also think, though, that it might tie in beautifully with what we learned in this episode, which is that her losing her memories of her mentor is not actually the full extent of the curse she has inherited. She's also actually seemingly gotten this situation where when she uses her sword, she can't actually use it to attack people. I will say that the way that was described was actually really cool, both visually in the way that different lighting and different effects and sounds were used to indicate the fact that she was being held back by some force that she can't actually see, and also in the fact that this was working and happening, and that it was actually seemingly referenced as though it was actually some form of Deus Ex Machina, or God from the Machine, which in normal circumstances is the idea in a story that something that was not part of what already existed in a story sideswipes the story and interferes in what the heroes are doing, making it so that this outside thing actually succeeds in completing their task rather than them doing it, and generally undermining the quality of the story that was being told. In this case, though, it doesn't seem so much like that's the case in that it's helping her, but rather that there's some kind of underlying force that is surrounding things and that is messing with things. And that was definitely something that was very unique. Because, I mean, I thought it was hard enough and harsh enough that she had lost the memories of this person who has been her life since she was a little girl because of everything that she went through. And then to realize that the curse was not the loss of the memory of him, but rather that she can't actually cut things with her blade when she's supposed to be going on this journey and everything. was absolutely insane. I really wonder how she's going to handle the situation she is in now, where she's going to be facing this person whose weapon she broke in the past when she can't actually use her weapon properly. That's definitely going to be something worth examining. And then, of course, there is our new bunny friend, who definitely comes with a whole bunch of baggage and questions that he has with him, because holy crap, we find out he's a boy, and we find out he's a boy in what has to be one of the weirdest situations I've ever seen in the history of film. She takes this bunny rabbit. Now, don't think of like little rabbit Fufu, tiny little regular pet bunny rabbit. Think of like an anthropomorphic bunny rabbit, but not quite a bunny boy. This was very animalistic, but it was just very large and white, and it's pretty cool looking. It's the rabbit I showed on the thumbnail. And she takes this thing into the freaking bathtub with her. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's like bathing with your dogs or something. It was weird. It was like, what is this? But that was a thing, and that definitely confused me immensely. Now, I do feel for this creature, because there were people who were trying to kill it and to obtain its blood, because apparently there's some kind of luck about apparently slicing and dicing this rabbit into itty-bitty pieces, and we see Belle stand up for this rabbit and fight for it and fight to protect it, which was definitely something which in the moment I agreed with, even though it definitely did cause trouble and everything. I think that this really does tie into how crazy this world building actually is, and how crazy the overall situation this character is going through is, because I mean, like, apparently her parents live in this place where she is visiting, but she doesn't want to see them. I mean, they wouldn't hypothetically be her birth parents, but the people who raised her before she ended up with her master and getting trained and everything. So that was something to consider. And then there were interesting magic and various social aspects that were fascinating. There apparently is like this inner and outer kind of, or upper and lower kind of caste system in this place, and you have to swear some kind of fealty to one or the other. There's also the fact that you need a dog tag to be able to carry a weapon, essentially a license, which I mean, I can see that there is something like that in the real world as an equivalent, so I can understand that one to an extent. There are apparently trials that she needs to take on top of what we saw last week that are going to help determine whether or not she'll get to be a nomad, and that's an interesting thing, and that's pushing the story forward, which I like. When we went to go and meet the king, though, that was freaking bizarre, because the king actually has two heads, one on top of his head and one in his stomach. That was definitely freaking weird. And they're using Yggdrasil, which is actually a Norse tree, I believe, which is an interesting reference. And there was some snake stuff involved, which, I mean, I can't remember the pronunciation, but there's like this serpent that goes around the world in Norse mythology, so having a snake tied into it made sense for me in that regard. Why they're getting her to fight against this person she's fought before, I do not know, but that seems to be the way it's going to be. Another interesting world-building thing that I noticed, and that I thought was actually really cool, is that in this world, there are people who play instruments to make plants grow. I'm sure someone's done that before, but I just thought it was a really interesting touch, and I genuinely liked it. And it was one of the few comforting things that I thought was interesting, and that I just thought was really neat. Overall, though, I did enjoy this episode, despite the fact that there is definitely a lot that I'm very confused about here. I think that there is an incredible amount of attention to detail and an incredible amount of strangeness in the characters that we are encountering in this story, but I suppose that, if nothing else, that will ensure that this will hopefully remain interesting. Anyway, though, those are my thoughts. I'd love to know what you thought of this episode, so drop a comment below and let me know, and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you later. Bye!